went completely still the moment I walked in. Not the party, not later over the phone, till and is late. The sharp, airless kind, where you can hear the flowers settling in their vases. My grandmother's funeral. 43 relatives packed into a chapel in Oakville, Ontario, and every single one of them turned to look at me, not because they were glad I came, because they hadn't expected me to come at all. My aunt was the first to move. She stood up from the second pew, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like offense, as if I'd shown up to a party I hadn't been invited to, which, in a way, was exactly what had happened my entire life. I found a seat near the back. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't love my grandmother. I did quietly, the way you love someone who tried her best but never quite knew how to protect you. I didn't cry because I'd spent the last 3 years learning how to feel my feelings in private, on my own schedule, without an audience who would use them against me later. My name is Hazel. I'm 31 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I have a cat named Pepper who greets me at the door every evening with the kind of enthusiasm my family never once managed in 31 years. I have a good job, a few genuinely good friends, and a last name that is not the one I was born with. This is the story of how I got here. I grew up the second of 3 kids in a house in Mississauga. My parents were not cruel people, not in the obvious ways. They didn't scream, they didn't throw things. What they did was something quieter and I think harder to explain to people who haven't lived it. They had a favorite, and it wasn't me, and they didn't bother pretending otherwise. My older brother was the athlete, hockey from age 6, rep team by 10, the kind of kid who takes up every room he enters and somehow makes the room feel grateful for it. My parents drove him to Brampton 3 times a week for practice. They drove to Burlington on weekends for games. They bought a second car when he made the AAA team because one car wasn't enough to manage his schedule. I'm not saying this resentfully anymore, I'm just saying it happened. My younger sister was the baby, the surprise, the one my mother talked about with her eyes going soft in a way they never went soft when she talked about me. And I was the middle one. The quiet one. The one who read books in her room and got good grades and never needed anything. Or at least, that was how they chose to interpret my silence. I needed plenty. I just learned early that asking didn't get you very far. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning when I was about 12, trying to catch my mother's attention. She was on the phone going over my brother's tournament schedule for the following weekend. I waited. I had a permission form due that day. Field trip to the Royal Ontario Museum, $10. She waved me off twice before she finally covered the receiver and said, loudly enough for whoever was on the phone to hear, "Can you not see I'm busy? Why didn't you ask me last night?" I hadn't asked her last night because she'd been at his game last night. And the night before that? And the night before that? I signed the form myself, in handwriting that I tried to make look like hers. The teacher noticed. She called home. My mother was embarrassed and blamed me for making her look bad. I didn't go on the field trip. That was the shape of my childhood. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing you can point to in a single moment and say, there, that was the wound. It was 1,000 small removals. 1,000 instances of being an afterthought. 1,000 mornings of watching someone else's life be treated as the important one. I did well in school because school was mine. Nobody drove me to school, nobody helped with projects or read over essays or showed up to science fairs, but nobody interfered either. I was on my own in there, and somehow that felt like freedom compared to the rest of it. I got into the University of Guelph on a merit scholarship. I remember telling my parents at dinner. My father looked up from his phone, said good, and looked back down. My mother said she hoped I'd considered the commute because she wasn't going to be driving me back and forth. I told her I'd be living in residence. She said that seemed expensive. I showed her the scholarship letter. She said nothing else. My brother got a send-off dinner when he left for his hockey camp in Minnesota. Extended family, my grandmother's butter tarts, a card with money in it. I moved into residence with 2 bags and the $5 plant from a gas station convenience store because I thought it would make the room feel more like home. I studied social work. I switched to nursing in second year because the job market was more concrete and I knew even at 19 that I could not rely on anyone else for financial stability. I graduated in 4 years on the dean's list with no debt because I had worked every summer in a warehouse in Brampton and every weekend at a coffee shop near campus, and I had been careful with every dollar in a way that nobody had ever taught me. I taught myself out of necessity. My convocation was on a Friday in June. I had sent my parents the information in March. I had texted a reminder in April. I had called and left a voicemail in May. I had texted again 2 weeks before, and then again the Monday of the week itself. My father replied to that last text at 11:48 on the Thursday night before the ceremony. He said they weren't going to make it. My brother's girlfriend had a family thing and they'd promised to go. He said congratulations and added a thumbs up emoji. That was it. A thumbs up emoji for 4 years of work. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my residence building at midnight and I ate the cold leftover pad thai I'd been saving in the mini fridge for a celebration dinner, and I cried for about 45 minutes. Not soft, polite crying. The ugly kind. The kind where your whole body is involved and you make sounds you didn't know you could make. And then I washed my face, set my alarm, and went to sleep. The next morning, I walked across that stage in the sunshine with the Guelph Arboretum in the background, and not one person in the audience was there for me. I cheered for a girl from my cohort whose parents had driven up from Windsor and whose mother was crying so hard she had to sit down. I smiled in the photos that a classmate took on my phone. I drove myself home. My sister called that evening. She'd forgotten too. She said she'd seen it on Facebook and felt bad. She asked if I was upset. I said no. I said of course not. I said these things automatically, the way you do when you spent your whole life managing other people's guilt about how they've treated you. I drove back to Mississauga that weekend because I had nowhere else to go. I had a few weeks before I started my first nursing job at a hospital in Hamilton. The plan was to stay home briefly, save some money, figure out next steps. I was home for 11 days. On the third day, my mother asked me to watch my sister while she and my father went out. My sister was 17. She did not need watching. I said I was tired from moving and asked if they could get a neighbor. My mother said I was being selfish. That was the word she used. Selfish. On the sixth day, I overheard my father on the phone telling someone, I think his brother, that I hadn't been able to find nursing work yet. I had a signed offer letter sitting in my email. I had never told him about it because I had stopped sharing things with him somewhere around age 15, and he had never noticed. On the ninth day, my mother sat me down and told me she thought I should consider moving back permanently. She said the commute to Hamilton wasn't so bad. She said it would be cheaper. She said it with the particular tone she reserved for things she had already decided about my life on my behalf without asking. I said I'd think about it. On the 11th day, I loaded my 2 bags back into my car, put my gas station plant on the passenger seat, and drove to Hamilton. I paid first and last on an apartment I could technically not quite afford yet, and I sat on the floor eating crackers because I hadn't bought furniture, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Quiet. The job was hard and I loved it. 12-hour shifts, the kind that hollow you out and fill you back up simultaneously. I was good at it. My patients liked me, my colleagues liked me. My supervisor told me at my 3-month review that I had strong instincts and good judgment, and that she'd seen nurses with 10 more years of experience who were worse in a crisis. I called home less and less. There was nothing pulling me back. My brother was in the States. My sister had her own life. My parents called occasionally, usually when they needed something. Could I look something up online? Could I recommend a doctor for something vague? Had I talked to my grandmother lately because she'd been asking about me? I answered when I could. I didn't initiate. A year into the job, something small happened that shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. I'd been shortlisted for a senior nursing role. A step up, more responsibility, a meaningful raise. I called my mother because I was excited and because despite everything, the instinct to want your parents to be proud of you does not die easily. It is persistent and inconvenient, and I spent years wishing I could remove it like a splinter. She listened. Then she said, Is that more hours? Because I don't know how you'd manage more hours. You always sound so tired. I said good night and I hung up. I got the job. I did not call to tell her. I started making plans that year, concrete ones. Had been thinking about Halifax for a while. A college friend had moved there. The hospital was hiring. The cost of living made more financial sense than Toronto or Vancouver ever would on a nursing salary. I started quietly researching. I told no one in my family. This was not dramatic. It was just practical. Nothing I did required their input. Nothing I did had ever required their input, really. They had just never noticed that they weren't involved. I applied for the transfer in October. I got confirmation in November. I gave notice on my Hamilton apartment. I arranged the move with a company out of Halifax. I sold the furniture I'd slowly accumulated, kept what fit in my car, and on a Sunday in early December, I drove out of Hamilton with my cat in a carrier on the back seat. And somewhere on the Trans-Canada Highway east of Montreal, I called Service Canada. I want to be clear, I had thought about this for a long time. I wasn't acting out. I wasn't being dramatic. I had thought about it the way you think about any decision that is technically reversible, but that feels, once you've made it, entirely right. My last name had never felt like mine. It was my father's name, and my father had made it quite clear throughout my life that his investment in me was minimal. I didn't want to carry a monument to that in every professional document I'd ever sign. I'd done the research. In Canada, you can apply for a legal name change through your provincial vital statistics office. In Ontario, where my birth was registered, it required a completed application, a fee of $137, and a waiting period. I had already submitted the paperwork 2 months prior. The confirmation had come while I was still in Hamilton. I hadn't told anyone. I pulled into a rest stop somewhere in Quebec and I sat with my cat in my lap. And I thought I could keep this quiet. I could change my name and simply never mention it and see how long it took anyone to notice. The answer, it turned out, was 14 months. Halifax was good from the beginning. The hospital was well run. My new colleagues were warm in the understated way that I find much more comfortable than performative warmth. My apartment was small and faced west and got late afternoon sun that turned everything gold in winter. I bought a proper couch. I bought a second-hand kitchen table and 2 chairs. I bought curtains. I spoke to my parents once a month, roughly. They didn't ask much. My mother occasionally mentioned family news with the mild expectation that I would be interested. My father forwarded emails about car insurance once. Normal low investment contact. Not late till the reef had settled a little. Not late till. The first person to notice was my cousin. We were not close, but we were decent to each other, which put her ahead of most of the family. She had looked me up on LinkedIn for professional reasons. She was in healthcare administration, and I think she'd remembered I was in nursing and was curious about my trajectory. She sent me a message that said simply, "Did you change your name?" I told her yes. She said okay. She sent a thumbs up. I thought about my father's thumbs up on the night before my convocation, and I felt something complicated move through my chest, and then I let it go. She told her mother. Her mother told someone. It moved through the family the way information moves through families. In a week, it had reached everyone. And in 2 weeks, my mother was calling me on a Tuesday night at 9:30. She wasn't angry exactly. She was wounded. She used the word embarrassed 3 times in the first 4 minutes. She said she'd found out from basically a stranger. She said it reflected badly on the family. She said she didn't understand what she had done to deserve this. She said, "You could have just talked to me." I thought about the permission form, the field trip, the grade 7 science fair that I had gone to alone and come in 3rd place and taken the bus home carrying a cardboard trifold display alone at age 13. I thought about the thumbs up emoji. I said, "I didn't think it would affect you." She said that of course it affected her. I was her daughter. I said I knew I was her daughter. She said then, "Why would I do this?" I said because my last name belongs to me and I can make my own decisions about it. She said I was being cruel. I said I was trying to be cruel. She said it felt cruel. I said I was sorry she felt that way. She said that wasn't an apology. She was right. It wasn't. She told my father. He called 2 days later. His call was shorter and flatter. He said he didn't understand the point. I said there wasn't a point exactly, it was just a personal decision. He said it seemed like a statement. I said maybe it was. He asked what statement. I said I've been thinking about identity and where I come from and what I want to carry forward, and I decided this was the right choice for me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is this about the graduation?" I hadn't expected that. I said yes. I said it was about the graduation and the science fair and the field trip permission form and the promotion call and 100 other things that probably didn't seem like much individually, but that added up over 30 years to something that felt like a clear picture of where I stood. I said I didn't hold any of it against them. I said I had genuinely moved on. But I said that moving on didn't mean pretending none of it had happened, and it didn't mean keeping a last name that had never felt like mine just to make someone else comfortable. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he guessed he understood. I don't know if he did, but he said it. That was 8 months before my grandmother's funeral. The chapel in Oakville was warm despite the January cold outside. I sat in the back row and watched my family arrange themselves in the pews the way families do, by proximity of grief, or by habit, or by some invisible politics I'd long since stopped trying to decipher. My aunt glanced back at me twice. My uncle kept his eyes forward. My mother, in the third row, did not look back at all, though I knew she knew I was there. The service was simple. My grandmother had requested hymns she liked and a reading from Ecclesiastes and no extended eulogies. She was practical that way. I think she and I would have understood each other better if there had been more years or more honesty or less family noise between us. Afterward, in the church hall, my aunt came to find me. She wasn't soft about it. That's not her way. She said she thought what I'd done was disrespectful, that changing my name was a public humiliation for my parents, that families work through things together, and running away, her words, wasn't how adults handled problems. She said she'd always thought I was sensible. She said she was disappointed. I stood with a cup of weak tea going cold in my hand, and I let her finish. Then I said, I didn't run away. I moved to Halifax. I have a job and an apartment and a cat and a life that I built without any help from this family. I changed my name because I wanted to. I'm here today because I love Grandma. That's the whole story. She opened her mouth. She closed it again. She looked at me the way people look at you when they've prepared for a fight and you've declined to give them one. My mother appeared then, as if she'd been waiting nearby. Maybe she had. She looked tired. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her. She looked at me with an expression I didn't entirely recognize, not quite guilt, not quite crade, not quite grief, something in between those things. She said, I'm glad you came. I said, she was my grandmother. We stood there for a moment in the hum of the church hall, with the January light coming grey through the windows and relatives moving around us with plates of sandwiches. And I thought about how strange grief is, how it can crack open a version of honesty that 20 years of regular life couldn't manage. My mother said, I know we weren't. I know things weren't always. She stopped, started again. I know the graduation was wrong. I knew it at the time. I said, I know you did. She said, I don't know why we. Another stop. It just never seemed urgent enough to fix. That sentence sat in my chest for a long time after. It still does sometimes. It never seemed urgent enough to fix, not because she meant to hurt me, but because she said it completely honestly, and because the honesty was, in its own way, worse than any deliberate cruelty would have been. I hadn't been worth the urgency. Not then. I am now, perhaps. But then I wasn't. I said, I forgive you. I want you to know that. I'm not angry anymore. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. I said, but I'm not moving home. I'm not changing my name back. I'm not going back to being the person who needed nothing. I do need things. I just need them from the right people now. I finished my tea. I said goodbye to my grandmother in the quiet way I prefer. standing briefly beside the photo board they'd assembled near the entrance, finding her face in the old pictures. Younger, straighter backed, standing in front of a car I didn't recognize in a decade I couldn't place. She looked like she knew something. She usually did. I drove to the airport. I flew back to Halifax. I landed at Stanfield just after 10 at night, took the bus to my neighborhood, walked the 4 blocks to my building in the cold, and when I opened my apartment door, Pepper ran directly into my shins at full speed and nearly knocked me over. I stood in my own kitchen, in my own home, with my coat still on and my cat winding figure eights around my feet, and I thought, this is mine, not given to me, not assigned, not left over from someone else's priorities. Mine. Because I had wanted it and worked for it and chosen it, one small decision at a time. Starting from the moment I sat in a parking lot eating cold pad thai and realized that waiting to be seen was going to cost me everything. I turned on the kettle. I hung up my coat. I gave Pepper the good food, not the regular stuff. And for the first time since the funeral invitation had arrived in my inbox, and I had sat very still for a moment, deciding, I felt the tension in my shoulders finally let go. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the chapel, not the confrontation with my aunt, not even the phone call where my mother finally said the word wrong out loud for the first time. It's the parking lot. Me, cold pad thai, midnight, alone. That's the moment I think about when I want to understand what my life used to cost me. I spent a long time believing that if I was good enough, quiet enough, capable enough, eventually the people who were supposed to see me would see me. That's not how it works. People see what they've decided to see. My parents had decided early that I was the one who didn't need much, and no amount of Dean's List placements or nursing promotions was going to change a story they'd already written. The cause wasn't my failure to perform. The effect wasn't punishment for being difficult. It was just indifference running on habit, unchallenged for 30 years, because nobody in that house had the honesty to name it. What I know now is that doing the right thing quietly over a long period of time is its own kind of integrity. I didn't leave Mississauga with a speech. I didn't change my name with fanfare. I built a life in Hamilton and then Halifax, made careful decisions, showed up for my patients the way nobody had shown up for me, and chose incrementally to stop organizing my choices around people who were not paying attention anyway. That's not bitterness. That's just good sense, eventually applied. The intelligence part. And I say this not as arrogance but as something I had to actively learn, is knowing the difference between problems you can solve and conditions you have to accept. I couldn't make my parents interested. I couldn't make me curious about me. That was not a problem with a solution. What I could do was stop treating their disinterest as information about my worth. Those are two different things, and confusing them cost me years. And the persistence. That's the one I'm most proud of, honestly. Not the name change. That was one afternoon of paperwork. The persistence was the warehouse summers and the coffee shop weekends and the first and last on the Hamilton apartment I couldn't quite afford, and the slow, unglamorous work of building something real out of nothing much. Nobody hands you that. Nobody drives you to that particular practice. You show up for it yourself every single day until one evening you're standing in your own kitchen in Halifax with your coat still on and a cat figure eating around your feet, and you realize the thing you built is actually yours. My mother said it never seemed urgent enough to fix. I don't say that to condemn her. I say it because it was the most honest thing she ever said to me, and because I think a lot of people live inside that sentence without knowing it, letting the important things drift because they're not loud enough, not inconvenient enough, not bleeding enough to demand attention right now. The things that quietly shape a person rarely are. I chose urgency for myself eventually. That's the whole story.